The rain had just started when the silver Bentley slowed at the edge of the gas station lot. And the old woman in the back seat could not see it coming, because Makeda Aldridge had been blind for 9 years, and she navigated the world now by sound and by smell, and by the small kindnesses of the people around her. She heard the tires change their song as they left the smooth highway for the cracked concrete. She smelled diesel and wet asphalt and the sugar and grease warmth of a roadside diner. And she heard her son's voice from the front seat, tight and low, telling the driver to pull around the far side, away from the pumps, where the light was bad and the cameras did not reach. She was 71 years old. She wore the good navy dress she saved for the days her son took her anywhere, because those days were rare now, and she wanted to be no trouble. And over it, a thin gray cardigan she had buttoned wrong at the second button, without knowing. In her lap, she held the only 2 things she carried everywhere: a worn brown leather Bible, its spine cracked soft as cloth from 40 years of holding, and inside its back cover, wrapped in a square of flannel, her late husband's brass pocket watch, the one Theodore had wound every night of their marriage until the night his hands went still. She held them the way she held everything she loved now, with both hands, lightly, in case the world tried to take them. Garrick Aldridge was 44 years old and worth on paper somewhere north of $200 million. And he had spent the entire drive deciding how to say the thing he had already decided to do. He owned a chain of luxury senior residences across 3 states, gleaming places with chandeliers in the lobbies and brochures full of smiling, silver-haired models. And the irony of it was a thing he never let himself look at directly. He could have placed his mother in the finest suite in any of them for free. Instead, he had kept her in a small apartment with a hired companion. And last month, he had let the companion go to save the cost. And this month, he had run out of patience for the problem of her entirely. He was engaged now. Tessa came from old money, the kind that summered in places and did not work. And Tessa's family had made it gently clear over dinner that they found his origins colorful, a boy from nothing who had clawed his way up. And Garrick had spent 2 years sanding those origins smooth. A blind mother who said grace out loud in restaurants and called him by his child name and reached for his face with both hands did not fit the man he had built. She was the last rough edge, and he had convinced himself, in the way cruel men always do, that this was not abandonment but management. It had not always been like this between them. And that was the part that would have broken your heart if you had known the whole of it. There had been a time when Garrick Aldridge was the most devoted son on his block. A skinny boy who walked his mother to the bus stop in the dark before her shift because he did not like her standing alone, who saved the change from his paper route in a coffee can to buy her a coat one winter, who sat in the front pew every Sunday beside Theodore and sang too loud and meant every word. Makeda had built her whole life on that boy. After Theodore passed, she had said to her friends at church that she was not afraid of getting old, and because she had raised a good man, and a good man does not let his mother be alone. She had been so certain of it. She did not understand, even now, even on that bench, what money had done to him on its way up. How it had taught him to be ashamed of the very things that had made him the maid's apron and the second-hand shoes and the mother who prayed out loud. Until the shame had grown so large there was no room left in him for the love underneath it. The love was still there. That was the tragedy. It was just buried so deep under fear of what Tessa's people would think that he could no longer reach it, and he had stopped trying. He helped her out of the car himself, which she took for tenderness. He even held her elbow across the lot, guiding her to a green-painted bench under the diner's narrow awning where the rain could not quite reach. And he set her cane against the armrest, and her hand found it, and she smiled up at the sound of him. "Sit here a minute, Mama," he said. "I have to make a call. Business." And Makeda, who had raised this boy alone on a hotel maid's wages, who had pressed his one good shirt every Sunday and gone without so he could have shoes that fit, nodded and said she would be right here. She was in no hurry. The rain was a comfort. It reminded her of home. She did not hear him take her small overnight bag back out of the trunk and set it quietly on the ground beside the dumpster. She did not hear him get back into the car. She only heard after a while the engine. And she lifted her face toward it and said his name. Once, lightly, the way you say a name you are sure will answer. It did not answer. The Bentley pulled out of the lot and turned onto the highway and was gone. And Makeda Aldridge sat alone on a bench at a gas station off Route 9 in the rain, holding a Bible and a dead man's watch, waiting for a son who was already 4 miles away and accelerating. She waited the way the faithful wait. She told herself the call was a long one. She told herself there was traffic. The rain thickened, and the awning began to drip a cold line down the back of her cardigan, and still she waited, because the alternative, that her own child had set her down like a piece of luggage he no longer wished to carry, was a thing her heart simply would not form into words. An hour passed. The diner's dinner rush came and went around her. And people noticed the old blind woman on the bench the way people notice weather, with a glance and a frown and a hurrying on. One or two asked if she was all right. She said she was waiting for her son. Thank you. He would be along directly, and the certainty in her voice made them believe her and leave her be. But there was a young waitress named Folak working the counter inside. A wide-hipped woman of 30 with kind, tired eyes and a gold cross at her throat. And Folak watched that bench through the fogged window for the better part of 2 hours, and something in the set of the old woman's shoulders would not let her look away. And then the part Makeda would never fully tell anyone, even later, even when telling it might have helped. Because the rain had driven her at last to stand, stiff and frightened, feeling for the diner door with her cane. And she had gone inside to ask, humbly, her voice cracking, whether anyone had seen a tall man in a gray suit, her son, whether he had left word. And as God would have it, the door behind her opened in that same moment, and a voice she knew better than her own came in out of the rain. Garrick had come back. Not for her. He had driven Tessa's father, who kept a hunting cabin up Route 9, to look at a parcel of land. And the old man had wanted coffee. And of all the diners on all the roads in that county, Garrick had pulled into this one without thinking, and walked in, and found his blind mother standing dripping in the middle of the floor, with 20 strangers watching, saying his name. She heard him. She turned toward the sound of the door, her whole ruined face opening with relief, and she said it out loud, in front of everyone. Garrick, Garrick, baby, I knew you'd come. I knew it. And she put out both her hands toward him the way she always had. And Garrick Aldridge, with Tessa's father at his shoulder and his whole laundered future standing in the doorway watching, looked at his mother's outstretched hands. And he did the thing that would damn him. He stepped back. He let a small, embarrassed laugh out of his mouth. And he said to the room, to the old man beside him, loud enough that the counter went silent, "I'm sorry, I don't know this woman. Some poor soul. They wander in off the road, you know how it is." And he took the rich old man by the elbow and turned him toward the booths, and left his mother standing there with her hands still out, in front of God and Folak and 20 strangers, denied. You may be asking the question the whole diner was asking. Why didn't someone stop him? Why didn't she call out the truth? Why didn't a single person say, "Sir, that is plainly your mother. Look at her face"? And the answer is, the answer cruelty always counts on. The room was full of strangers, and strangers do not know who is lying. A well-dressed man speaks with the easy authority of money and says a confused old woman is no one to him, and the most people will do is feel uneasy and look at their plates. Makeda herself did not cry out the truth a second time, because something in her had finally heard what her heart had been refusing for 2 hours. And a person who has just understood that her only child is ashamed enough of her to deny her to a room does not argue the point. She does not have it in her. She simply lowered her hands. She found the back of a chair with them, and she sat, and she got very small and very quiet, and she waited for the floor to stop tilting. And Garrick, this is the part that mattered, the mechanism of how a man gets away with it. Garrick was good at this. He had Tessa's father seated and coffee ordered within 90 seconds, talking land prices, his voice never once shaking. And to the old man it was nothing, a beggar in a diner. The city was full of them. He paid for 2 coffees and a slice of pie and tipped well, because well-tipping men are remembered as kind, and 20 minutes later he walked his future father-in-law back out to the Bentley past the very bench where he had left his mother, and he did not look at it, and they drove away a second time. He had denied her in public and suffered nothing. That is the thing the audience is never supposed to forget about this kind of cruelty. In the moment, it works. The wicked do prosper in the moment. The book that Makeda held in her lap had a great deal to say about exactly that, and about what comes after. What came after that night was Folek. The waitress had watched the whole thing through the pass-through window with a dish towel gripped in both fists, and her jaw clenched so hard it ached. And the second the Bentley's lights swung out of the lot, she came around the counter and crouched down in front of the old woman and took both those cold hands in hers and said, "Ma'am, my name is Folek, and I saw all of it. You are not no one, you hear me? You are not no one." And Makeda Aldridge, who had held herself together through the rain and the waiting and the denial, came apart at last at the kindness of a stranger, the way the strong always do. Not at the blow, but at the first gentle hand after it. Folek took her into the back, sat her in the warm little office, made her sweet tea, and got the story out of her in pieces. There was no other family. Theodore had passed 6 years back. There was the son, and the son was. She would not say a hard word about him even then. She said only that he was going through something, that the wedding had him strained, that he would surely call. Foleke, holding a phone that the old woman could not see, did not say what she was thinking, which was that no one was going to call. She found a faith-based shelter 2 towns over that took the elderly, and she was reaching for her coat to drive Makeda there herself. When the bell over the diner door rang one more time that night, well past closing, and changed the shape of everything. The man who came in out of the rain was tall and unhurried, and dressed in clothes that were expensive in the quiet way real money is quiet. A charcoal overcoat, no logo, good shoes gone honestly scuffed. He was black, 60 years old, with close-cropped silver hair and a trim gray beard, and the kind of deep, steady calm that fills a room without raising its voice. His name was Elijah Voss, and the people in that county who read the business pages knew it well, though Folek did not. He had built a chain of grand hotels up from a single roadside motel his own mother had cleaned rooms in. And he had a habit, on the long drives between his properties, of stopping at small diners off the highway, because he had learned long ago that you can tell everything about a place by how it treats the people who cannot tip. He had meant only to get coffee and dry off. He found a waitress with red eyes and an old blind woman holding a Bible in a back office, and he asked, in his unhurried way, whether everything was all right. And here, if Makita's story has its hold on you. If you are sitting forward now wanting to know what the man in the charcoal coat did next, stay with me, because what happens from here is the part this whole story has been walking toward, and you will not want to miss the turn. Elijah Voss listened to the whole of it without once interrupting. He let Folak tell the parts the old woman was too gentle to tell. And when it was done, he was quiet a long moment, looking at the cracked spine of the Bible in Makita's lap, and at the brass watch she had taken out and was turning over and over in her fingers without knowing she did it, the way a person worries a wound. And something moved in his face that was not pity. Pity looks down. This looked level. It was recognition. Because Elijah Voss had buried his own mother 11 years before, and he had spent 11 years wishing he had given her one more good day, and he could not abide, could not physically sit still in the presence of an old mother set out in the rain by a child who had everything to give and gave nothing. He did not announce who he was. He asked the old woman only 3 things. He asked her name, and she told him, Makita Aldridge. He asked her late husband's trade, and she said Theodore had been a Pullman porter 40 years and then a deacon, and that the watch had been a railroad watch, given for 40 years without a single day late. And he asked, very gently, the name of her son. And Makita, even then, hesitated, because to name him was to accuse him, and she was not built to accuse her own child. But she was also a woman who did not lie, not even to shield a sin, and so at last she said it. Garrick Aldridge. And Elijah Voss went still, because he knew that name. He knew it from a different page of the business news entirely. Garrick Aldridge owned a chain of senior residences, gleaming places, chandeliers in the lobbies, that had just that spring applied to lease 3 of Elijah Voss's prime downtown properties to expand into the luxury elder care market. The deal was on Elijah's desk. It was waiting for his signature. He did not tell the old woman any of that. He simply took out his phone and he made 2 calls right there in the diner office, while Folaka watched with her hand over her mouth. The first was to a suite at the finest of his own hotels, the grand old one downtown with the marble lobby and the rooftop garden, instructing the night manager that Mrs. Makita Aldridge would be arriving within the hour, that she was to have the garden suite, a private nurse, a doctor's visit at first light, and anything at all she asked for on his personal account, indefinitely. The second call was to his attorney, and that call was shorter and much quieter, and all he said was, "The Aldridge lease, don't sign it. Pull everything and bring it to me in the morning. I want to know exactly who I'm dealing with." Then he put the phone away, and he knelt down, a man of 60, in a good coat, on a diner floor, so that his face was level with a blind woman's face, and he said, "Mrs. Aldridge, my name is Elijah. I knew your husband's kind of man. Tonight you are my guest, and you will not spend another night anywhere you are not honored. Will you let me drive you?" And Makita, who had been denied by her own blood not 3 hours before, reached out and found this stranger's hands, and held them and said, "The Lord does not close a door, but he opens a window." My Theodore used to say that. And Elijah Voss, who had not wept in 11 years, had to look at the ceiling for a moment before he could answer her. The garden suite at the Voss Grand was larger than the apartment Makita had lived in for a decade. She did not need to see it to feel the difference. The warmth of real wool under her feet, the quiet of thick walls, the nurse named Adunni who read to her in the evenings and described the rooftop roses by their smell. For the first time in years, Makita Aldridge was treated not as a problem to be managed, but as a woman to be honored. And the change in her over those first days was the kind of thing the nurse would talk about for the rest of her life. She sat up straighter. She laughed again. She asked, on the 3rd morning, whether someone might wind Theodore's watch for her, because her own hands shook too badly now. And Elijah Voss himself came up to the suite and did it, wound the old brass railroad watch and held it to her ear so she could hear it tick, and she listened with her eyes closed and said it sounded just like him. Just exactly like him, and thanked God out loud. There was a moment, that first week, that the nurse Aduni never forgot. Makeda had been quiet all morning, and at last she said she had a confession to make. And could the young woman keep it? She said she was ashamed of how much she was enjoying the roses and the soft bed and the kind voices. Because somewhere out there her son was alone, and a mother is not supposed to be comfortable while her child is in trouble. Even a child who had done what hers had done. And Aduni, who was 26 and did not have half this woman's faith, but was learning it by watching her, said the truest thing she could think of, which was, "Ma'am, maybe being honored is its own kind of witness. Maybe God set you up here on purpose, where everybody can see, so they'd know what he thinks a mother's worth." And Makeda was quiet a long time. And then she smiled and said her Theodore would have liked Aduni very much, and asked her to read the part about the lilies of the field, the part about how they neither toil nor spin. And yet, they sat together in the rose smell and the warm light, the old blind woman and the young nurse, and neither of them said anything more for a while. And it was, Aduni said later, the most peaceful hour of her life. But Elijah Voss was doing more than restoring an old woman's dignity. He was, very quietly and very thoroughly, finding out who Garrick Aldridge really was. Money has long ears. By the end of that first week, Elijah's people had assembled the whole picture. The companion let go to save money. The mother kept in a cheap apartment by a man worth 200 million. The senior residence empire built on glossy promises, and it turned out on cut corners, understaffed night shifts, complaints buried, 2 regulatory fines quietly paid in another state. A man who marketed dignity to other people's elderly parents while denying it to his own. And the lease that would have handed Garrick 3 of the best buildings downtown and the prestige to close his merger and marry his heiress, sat unsigned in Elijah Voss's drawer. And Garrick did not yet know the ground had moved under him. And here is the way Elijah Voss moved. Because it matters that the justice in this story was not a wave of a wand, but a patient and lawful undoing. He did not slander Garrick. He did not have to. He simply declined to do business with him, which was his right. And he made a few quiet calls to the people he had spent 40 years earning the trust of. A banker here, a board member there, the editor of a paper who owed him nothing but respect. And he asked them only to look, with their own eyes, at the public record of Aldridge residences. The fines were real. The buried complaints were real. Filed by real families who had been told, when their own mothers and fathers were neglected on those understaffed night shifts, that they were imagining things. Elijah Voss did not invent a single sin. He only turned on the lights in a room Garrick had counted on staying dark, and let honest people see what had always been there. That is the kind of justice the faithful believe in. Not vengeance, which belongs to God, but truth, which has a way of surfacing the moment someone with nothing to fear refuses to keep covering it. By the time the reckoning came, every fact that undid Garrick Aldridge was a fact he had made true himself. Elijah had merely refused to help him hide it. Garrick learned it in pieces, the way a man feels a floor give before he understands he is falling. First the lease, which had been all but promised, went silent, calls unreturned, the closing date under review. Then Tessa's father, who had real money's instinct for the smell of trouble, began asking questions Garrick could not answer about the regulatory fines in the other state. things a careful man should not have been able to find. Then a reporter from the business desk left a message about labor practices at Aldridge Senior Facilities, which meant someone had pointed her there. Garrick's whole laundered world, the one he had set his mother out in the rain to protect, began coming apart at every seam at once, and he could not see the hand doing it. And that not seeing was its own particular torture. He did not once connect it to a gas station off Route 9. He had genuinely, completely put her out of his mind. That is the thing about that kind of man. He thought the danger to him was business. He never imagined it was justice. It came to a head at a charity gala, which was the cruelest possible venue for Garrick and the most fitting, because galas were where he had learned to shine. He arrived with Tessa on his arm, in a tuxedo, into a marble ballroom, still believing he could talk his way back from whatever had gone wrong, still working the room. And the host of that gala, the man whose foundation it was, the man every other guest had come to be seen by, was Elijah Voss. Garrick did not know they had ever met. He crossed the floor with his hand already out and his pitch already loaded, ready to be charming about the lease. And Elijah Voss looked at that outstretched hand, the same gesture, the same easy confidence the diner had seen 3 weeks before, and did not take it. Instead, Elijah said, in that unhurried voice that filled the room without rising, "Mr. Aldridge, I've been wanting to meet you properly. There's someone here who'd like to see you." And he stepped aside. And there, seated in a place of honor at the head table in a gown of deep gold, with the nurse Aduni at her side and Theodore's brass watch on a chain at her throat where everyone could see it, was Makeda Aldridge, blind, composed, turned toward the sound of her son's footsteps. The whole ballroom had gone quiet the way a room goes quiet when it senses something is about to happen. And into that quiet, Elijah Voss said, clearly, so that every important person Garrick had ever wanted to impress could hear it, "This is Mrs. Makeda Aldridge. She raised her son alone on a maid's wages and sent him to school in pressed shirts. 3 weeks ago, that son left her blind at a gas station in the rain, and when she reached for him in front of a roomful of strangers, he told them he did not know her. He called his own mother a beggar." Elijah let that sit. Then, "I do not do business with men who deny their mothers. The lease is dead, and every soul in this room now knows exactly the kind of dignity Aldridge Residences provides. The kind a man won't even give the woman who bore him." And then he was silent, and the silence did the rest. There was no shouting. There did not need to be. Garrick Aldridge stood in the middle of the most important room he had ever been in his perfect tuxedo, and watched his entire constructed life evaporate in the space of 30 seconds. Tessa took her hand off his arm. He saw her father, across the room, give one small shake of the head. The verdict of old money, final and silent. The lease was gone, which meant the merger was gone, which meant the leverage was gone, which meant Tessa was gone. And within the year, when the reporter's story ran and the fines came to light and the buried complaints surfaced, Aldridge Residences would be gone too, sold off in pieces to settle what it owed. He had set one rough edge down at a gas station to make himself smooth, and the edge had turned out to be the foundation, and the whole tower had come down. He started to speak, started to say her name. Mama. The child word, the first true thing out of his mouth in years. And Makeda Aldridge, who could not see him but who knew his voice better than any sound on earth, lifted one hand, gently, the way she had once lifted it to quiet a fussing child, and stopped him. She did not curse him. She was not built for cursing. And the people who expected a tongue lashing did not understand the woman or the God she served. She simply said, into the silent ballroom, in a voice that did not shake, "I forgave you in the rain, son. While I was still sitting on that bench, before I even knew for certain you weren't coming back, I forgave you. Because I am your mother, and that is my work, and I will not lay it down. But forgiving you is mine to do. Consequences belong to God, and it seems he has been busy." And then she turned her blind face toward the warmth of where Elijah Voss stood. And she said, "I am tired. I would like to go home now." And she meant the suite. She meant the place with the roses she could smell, and the people who said her name like it was worth saying. She did not reach for her son again. She had reached twice. A mother is allowed to stop reaching. Garrick Aldridge walked out of that ballroom alone, and the road down was as fast as the climb had been slow. Within 18 months, the residences were liquidated, the fines paid in full, the license surrendered. He was not jailed. His crimes were the legal kind of cruelty, the kind that ruins lives without breaking statutes. But he was finished in every room that had ever mattered to him. And the heiress married someone older and duller and safe. And the colorful boy from nothing went back, in the end, to being nothing. Only without the innocence he'd started with. People asked Makeda, in the years after, whether she ever heard from him. She would touch the brass watch at her throat and say, only, "I pray for my boy every night by name. That is the whole of what I can do, and it is not nothing." And that was all she would say. She lived 7 more years, and they were the best years of her long life, which is a thing that ought to be said plainly so no one mistakes this for a sad story. Elijah Voss never let her leave the Voss Grand. He had no mother to honor anymore, and he honored hers instead. And the two of them took to having Sunday dinner together every week in the rooftop garden among the roses, the old hotelier and the blind deacon's widow. And he said once that those Sundays gave him back something he'd thought was buried with his own mama 11 years before. Folake, the waitress who refused to look away when 20 other people did. Elijah found her too, and paid her way through nursing school. And she came to work at the Grand, and it was Folake who sat with Makeda Aldridge at the very end, holding the worn brown Bible open on the old woman's lap, reading aloud the psalm about the righteous flourishing like the palm tree, while the brass watch ticked on the nightstand the way it had ticked for 60 years. Makeda's last morning was a bright one. The nurse opened the window, and the smell of the roses came in. And Makeda asked for the watch in her hand, and they gave it to her. And she held it the way she had always held the things she loved, with both hands, lightly, in case the world tried to take them. Only this time, the world wasn't trying to take anything. This time she was the one letting go, on her own terms, honored, in a high, warm room with people who loved her, a long way and a whole lifetime from a cold bench in the rain. They said her face at the end was not the face of a woman who had been wronged. It was the face of a woman who had been right. Right about her God. Right about the window he opens. Right that consequences belong to him and arrive in their own time and are rarely the ones the wicked brace for. To God be the glory. She would have wanted those to be the last words, so let them be. Before you go, I want to know where in this wide world you're watching from tonight. Drop your city, your country, your flag in the comments, so we can all see how far this little family of ours reaches. And tell me this, because I read every one. Have you ever watched the Lord open a window for somebody the world had already counted out? Makeda's story is one of mine. Share yours below. If it moved you, give it a like so it finds the next person who needs it, and stay close. There's another story waiting right here about another soul the proud thought they could throw away. And I think you'll want to see how that one turns too.